I'm somebody who went through a lot of things, and what really shifted my life um, and created healing for me was the Hearing Voices Network and the Wildflower Alliance. I'm going to share a little bit about myself in the hopes of illustrating some points and the idea that it's possible. It's possible for somebody who's been stuck, in my case, for 20 years, for things to change. And I am so grateful you're all here because it's such a tough job. It's such a tough job to try to create relationships with empathy and integrity and a belief in growth and equity and connection in a system that is so focused on containment, control, compliance, coercion, and correction. That's a tough job, and I'm hoping that some of what I share may, give you some ideas about how to navigate that. We have a system that when people see something they don't understand, right, they get afraid. And when they get afraid, they think, I need to stop this, I need to control it. And, uh, and that creates frequently more harm. It's not a trauma-informed approach. Where I'm coming from is can we be curious about what actually is going on? Is this actually a crisis? And what I do next, will it increase or decrease the danger? And whatever I do, can I do it with integrity, with honesty, to share with somebody what's going on, why it's going on, and potentially give them a choice, to change the trajectory. And so I just want to read out, actually, can somebody else read this for me? And then we're going to ask you to answer some of these questions.
Sure, I can read it. This is Carrie.
Thank you.
Patient is a 50-year-old woman who isolates in her apartment unless one of her adult children is available to accompany her outside of her home and hold her hand. She spends most of her time watching TV, drinking coffee, and smoking cigarettes. She experiences both auditory and visual hallucinations. Her apartment is cluttered and unkempt. When she has difficulty sleeping, she will drink alcohol. She refuses to answer her phone or open her mail and relies on delivery and her children to get food. She will not answer her door. She does not have a primary care doctor or any services. She does not keep up with personal hygiene or other daily living skills. She also goes through extended periods where she is unable to communicate verbally and or where she engages in self-injurious behaviors, primarily cutting.
So if people can digest that for a second and then try to imagine, what that individual's diagnosis might be and put that in the chat and maybe think about what that individual's prognosis is. And most importantly, what interventions or services would you recommend?
So feel free to drop in the chat, reading this case, what you think as a social worker, clinician, or maybe as an experienced attorney who works with folks with mental health concerns. What do you think this individual's diagnosis would be, prognosis, and what interventions?
If you don't want to die, dive into the world of diagnosis, focus on the last question. And so I see interventions might involve getting children to help, telephone contact. Yeah, people can, oh, I love another
So
intervention.
we have some people saying depression, agoraphobia. Interventions could be connection with providers, primary health care, mental health evaluation. Some folks have said PTSD. Some said the prognosis is poor without intervention. I see some anxiety, another agoraphobia. Let's see. Talk to her about what she'd like to change in her life and discuss possible options. PTSD, agoraphobia, definitely need an expert to speak with them. Connection to community so she can connect with other people, peer support. Use motivational interviewing to see if she wants any of this to change and if she has supports, but that she's not bothering anyone.
Really love that comment. Like, is this actually a dangerous situation? Is it not? Yeah.
Could ask her about her auditory hallucinations and about what it is that she's actually hearing. Somebody is suggesting a dual diagnosis, treatment approach, counseling, social groups, and help in the home. Building trust is going to be huge. Somebody
Absolutely.
suggested teletherapy for her since maybe she doesn't want to leave the house.
We're
These are,
gonna move on. You
yep.
guys did a, I'm very grateful that you jumped in and you had many ideas about possible steps forward. And we're gonna learn a little bit more about this person as we go along and what actually worked out for them. Uh, I'm gonna start off with a statement that I made. I got to do a keynote for ISPS, the International Society for Psychological and Social Approaches to Treating Psychosis. That's the name of it. But anyways, this is my statement to them because that word psychosis really doesn't define too much. Like it gets used very broadly, and so I made my own definition of what I was going through that got labeled that way. I reached a point in my life when I could no longer bear reality, and in my struggle to make sense of the senseless, I became lost. I was told to believe in a reality that did not match what my heart, mind, soul, and body knew to be true. Research has shown that this can be a necessary and protective response to trauma. The effect was that the only certainty I had was that impending doom would be my constant companion in a hostile world. In my efforts to find a path upon which some piece of me could survive, my soul was shattered and contorted. When I sought help, instead of finding care for and understanding of my own true self, my identity was stolen by diagnosis. And so it's a little bit about me. In the background is Hanscom Field. If I imagine some of you can relate or know about Hanscom Field. My dad worked at the Air Force Base there. I was a kid who came into the world under adverse conditions. I was born with a bilateral cleft lip and cleft palate. My mother had drank alcohol when she was pregnant with me. Um, they didn't have health insurance. My uncle delivered me, handed me to my dad, and said, "Get this baby to a hospital." Uh, and at that time, there was a Boston Floating Hospital, a charity hospital. And my mom, the way my mom talks about it is, she didn't get to see me because my uncle thought it might kill her to see me, but she could see him cry. So right from the get-go, we were, our relationship was fractured. And I was the kid that, when people, I was the kid who hid because she had shame and guilt. over my appearance and what happened, and not the kid you pass around and take pictures of. But we lived in a multi-apartment house, and there were people who lived above us who treated me special. I felt special. People who took care. I used to have really big hair, and they would use a wire brush to brush it. I felt seen and heard and loved until one day my words didn't work anymore. Me saying no did not stop what they did. Um, and it was so sad for my little heart because I thought, oh, the people who see me and care for me, now they don't even see me. Now I'm an object for somebody's desire. And it was very hard to try to understand that. And trying to talk to my mother, I could tell her a little bit, and her anger just scared me. And she really didn't give me instruction. So it was very confusing to me because I wanted to be special. I wanted to be held, but I didn't want to get hurt. And in my little kid brain, I blamed myself. I'm like, oh, if I could only be good enough, if I could only understand the rules, maybe it wouldn't be this way. And as time went on, by the time I was 12, I had a voice telling me to kill myself or my mother. And part of the context of that experience was my mother had finally gone to a psychiatrist and said, I think I have a drinking problem. And some of you might be old enough, but like in the 70s, there was this phrase, mother's little helper. Anybody know what that was? Uh, the doctor told her, you're not an alcoholic. Just don't drink and take Valium. What happens when you drink and take Valium? Very hard formula, right? Whether or not you have an issue with drinking, adding drinking to Valium is really tough. And so her decline accelerated. And I was usually the victim of her anger and distress. And in my world, I just focused on not feeling my feelings, watching everybody else and trying to figure out who's going to go off on who so I could protect myself. I got very good at watching, but no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't figure it out. And when I couldn't figure it out, the way child development works, I would blame myself. Like how sometimes kids say, if I was only good enough, my parents wouldn't get divorced. That kind of logic. And so I get mad at myself for not seeing it coming. And so my mother, we had an incident where at 12, she did hit me, and I have this voice screaming that I have to pick between her and myself. And I run away, I go up my room, and I know my mother will be coming after me, and she will have something in her hand. And I look around my room, and what I did was I picked up this book, Burying My Heart, The Wounded Knee, which is a story of the indigenous people of this country. And it has a story in it called The Trail of Tears. People being marched to death to a reservation. And I felt like I was on the Trail of Tears. And so it was a very symbolic thing for me to pick up. And my mother came in, and I told her, if you hit me, I'll hit you back twice as hard. And she did, and I did. And it totally changed our relationship. She only hit me twice again in my life, and both times not that hard. And so it was like kind of a great thing, but I felt guilty. Who hits their mother? That's not normal. What a bad kid I am. And so that was really tough. Decades later in therapy, a therapist says to me, that's how it works. I'm like, what do you mean? She said, kids quit getting hit when they're big enough to hit back. And when she said that to me, it's like she stuck the shame right out of me. It's very healing. And I called up my cousin who had lived in the same house and experienced some of the same things. And he got to tell me about standing up to his dad. And we're like, wow, we're not bad people. It was like a pretty amazing moment. The other thing going on with 12 was I knew not to tell anybody what happened. What was going on in my house, once I told the guidance counselor I was not happy in that house and I didn't want to live there. When they saw me the next week, I said the same thing. And then the next week he wasn't there. And the week after that he wasn't there. And then I asked my mom, what happened to Mr. Green? And she said, he got fired for being inappropriate with you. Which I don't know what the truth was. I just knew he was gone. But the message in my head was, if you tell, you'll be hurting people. I blamed me for him going. Um, and, I did get, threatened in that household, don't tell, you'll be ruining the family, all that. So when people get told not to tell, sometimes they start speaking in metaphors. Or they make up less horrible stories about what happened. So instead of saying, my dad, blah, 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 I might say aliens did. But I'll make up a story to try to explain how I'm feeling, or maybe to try and communicate how I'm feeling without naming what actually happened. And I may have tricked myself into it, or I might be doing it more intentionally. Um, so I'm always curious about metaphors personally. So my solution was to blame myself, to try not to be me, to try not to think, feel, or remember. I broke into pieces. I had a little girl part, and I had what some people might call a protector part, Marty, who was not a very, very angry and not very pleasant person. But anyways, in this breaking apart thing, I just thought, if I could be somebody else, I'd be all right. And I ended up being an IV drug user. I ended up homeless. Um, and the drugs worked until they didn't work. And then I entered the mental health system. And people would say to me, aren't you proud? You got a year clean and sober. And I would say, no, I have feelings. I have nightmares. I don't know how to live using. I don't know how to live not using. So guess what they said? They said, don't worry. We just got to get you on the right cocktail. Now, for me, who identified as an alcoholic, I thought that was hilarious. And I loved the idea of it because that was my theory. Put the right drug in me and life is livable. Go team. Now I got somebody who went to school, it's legal, they know all the pills, and I would go back and say, I still have a feeling. I still have nightmares. And I worked my way up to being on Thorazine. And the thing with Thorazine is it didn't actually stop the voices. It stopped me from caring about anything. It stopped me from having feelings. Um, Maybe made everybody's life around me easier, but it was not a great thing. And so when I talk about trauma, I just want to say there's tons and tons of research that's been replicated around trauma and emotional distress. And I'm sure, I'm not sure. I'm hopeful that everybody here has heard of the Adverse Childhood Experience Study. And that research was huge. It's been replicated. It's been replicated by the World Health Organization. There are now versions of it that include factors like race and gender. And, in this original ACE study, they didn't even have bullying in there as a adverse life experience. But anyways, in this original ACE study, an individual with an ACE score of 7 plus was 500% more likely to hear voices or see visions than an ACE score of 0. And what we found in the work that we do is that 70 to 80% of people who have voices who are struggling, they have voices that reflect a traumatic memory or feeling. And so, for instance, women and men who have been assaulted, sometimes they have a screaming voice. In a social setting, a voice will start screaming because it's afraid or trying to warn the person you're going to get hurt again. For me, I had a really awful voice, which was a combination of 4 people who had hurt me. And I didn't realize it when I was hearing it until people asked me a lot of questions. I put it together. But when I wrote down what it was saying, then I realized word for word, it was just repeating messages that the people who harmed me had said. It was like, I had been so afraid of it and trying to ignore it and deny it, the voice. But once I actually looked at it, I'm like, oh my goodness, now I know. What else is new? You've been out to get me forever. And kind of what people did for me was they said, when does it come? And initially I said, all the time. And they said, get cards, write down when it comes. Where are you? What are you doing? What time of day? And then I realized really quickly, I don't hear it all the time. And there are times where I won't hear it at all. But it was a whole process of moving towards it. And eventually, somebody went through with it, through the list of things it said, and we had to figure out whether I believed them. You know, and one of those things that we did was we went to a playground, and they said, "Would you blame a 5-year-old? Would you blame a 5-year-old if a adult talked them into something?" I'm like, "No." He's like, "Well, quit blaming yourself." Um, and so once I moved through the shame and guilt, it lost its power and eventually went away. Sometimes there are voices. They call them protector voices, but that's not how they felt for me. But they would say things like, don't go out, don't trust anybody. They're out to get you, they're watching you. And I will tell you that there is a phenomena of people who have been impatient a whole bunch, feeling like they're being watched. And to me, I'm like, you learned it. You were being watched, you know? And if you realize that's where that's coming from, you can reassure yourself when you're not impatient. But that feeling of being watched, imagine this, you're sleeping and somebody comes in randomly at night with a flashlight. How would you feel? That's what happens to people when they're impatient. People walking around behind you taking notes. Everything that you do is seen through a illness symptom lens, right? I can remember arguing with the staff, you can't call me paranoid when you're following me around. You can call me schizophrenic, but not paranoid. When you are entering my room unannounced where I sleep with a total stranger, you cannot call me paranoid. It's just not fair. And so I just want to do this little thing. I agreed to do a little bit of research, where the evidence is. The evidence is not in chemical imbalance or gene studies. Uh, Trauma research has huge numbers, it's replicated. Um, and when we look at these gene studies, you know, sometimes they come out with around a possible 2% correlation versus a 500% correlation with trauma. So I know um, this theory is taught, but I'm saying if you're looking for the evidence is with trauma. And they have been spending billions of dollars trying to look for a biomarker. And the only biomarker they really found is that somebody's brain can change as a result of trauma. And they have found that if you're being prescribed drugs marketed as antipsychotics like Haldol, it can damage your brain. So Haldol, which I took off and on for 20 years, can thin the cortical lining of your brain. So I'm not saying that drugs can't be helpful. Um, they can be, but they can also be harmful. And if I'm so medicated, I can't think, feel, remember, or get in touch with my feelings, they may block me from healing. But for instance, if I'm not sleeping, I have no problem taking a drug. I'm just more like, what are the other things we can put in? I had a therapist who said, we just want to get you on enough so you can process this stuff without, you know, breaking into pieces. Um, so sometimes pills can ease pain, but there's no pill that we found that can heal trauma. So that's kind of my punchline on that. Just really quickly, you know, I have a trauma mindset. I view the world through a trauma lens, right? I have beliefs and perceptions based on the trauma I experienced. And so when I go in the mental health system, guess what? The things they're doing, maybe with great intent, they sound the same. Don't tell or you'll get hurt. Talk about it, you lose your rights. Um, Quit fighting and make it easier on yourself. Be compliant or it'll get worse. Sounded exactly the same. If you've ever been put in restraint, it's, it's almost like reenacting a sexual assault. It's like, I just can't believe how amazing. People would say, "Oh, Cindy, we're going to keep you safe. Now take off all your clothes in front of a stranger and put them in a paper bag." That was not like a mood enhancer. It didn't make me feel safer. Right? Or we're doing this for your own good. We're locking you in a room all by yourself. And nobody's going to talk to you. They're just going to look in the window. This last one, you should be grateful you have it this good. I was told I needed to accept my diagnosis and be happy with a very limited life. Sounded the same. So the result was the services echoed the trauma versus addressing it. It reinforced feelings of powerlessness, shame, guilt, silencing, pending doom, hopelessness, and forced capitulation to authority. Right? So I might agree to do something even though I don't agree. I might agree because I might say I can get out of this less injured. So I might do that with an abuser, and then a system that says you can sign yourself in or we'll commit you. It felt like the same thing. I'm being asked to do something I think is wrong, which means I'm going to get mad at me, but I'm doing it to hopefully be, I'd rather walk in or go in an ambulance than handcuffs. You know, but this is a big thing. Addressing shame and guilt. So I told you I had this person who worked with me and would keep telling me it was not my fault. It was not my fault. Um, he could stand to hear what I said, even if it was, he would say, "Oh, you're talking in code." And he would try to figure out what it meant. Absolutely, I got to play a role in my own rescue, which gives me back power. It gets me out of the victim role. I got to connect with other people who were going through similar things, and I found out I wasn't alone. And the most amazing thing I found out was there were other people who were given the same diagnosis as me, but they were building lives they wanted to live. So it became possible that maybe what I was told wasn't true. Maybe I can heal. Maybe I won't need to be on heavy drugs my whole life. And once I heard that, I became willing to try things. Once I met people like that, oh, how do you do it? How do you navigate that? How do you move through that? And sometimes sharing power is just really simple. Like over and over, I'd be in the hospital, and then finally somebody from the wildflower told me about a 3-day notice. And maybe someone had given me a piece of paper in the past 15 years that told me that, but it never sunk in. To have somebody say, "You can do this is what it would look like. If you want to go to the nurse's station, we can fill out together," was like, wow. And I'll give you one more example of sharing power, which may sound odd, but frequently the way they would handle me is to put me in isolation for days. And so one time I'm in this place, I'm in isolation the third day, and I start banging my head against the wall. And the charge nurse comes in, who is a guy, I used to call him the king. The king comes in and says to me, "You are making decisions, and your decisions have consequences." He was helping me locate my power. I thought I had no power. I thought it was hopeless. There was nothing I could do, which is why I was banging my head. And I said to him, "What is the decision I need to make to be able to get out of this room?" He said, "Shut up for 24 hours. Quit talking back to your voices, and I'll get you out of here." And of course, I said, "Do you have a pill for that?" And like, "Can you like sedate me and then I'll shut up?" And which he agreed to. And so this is what my life kind of looks like now. Uh, I got to go to a training. I wasn't even talking. I'll actually do this. I got invited. I'm on disability. I'm off the Thorazine. I'm only on Haldol. I get to go to Texas. My therapist says, don't go. You'll get locked up down there. You'll never come back. We won't be able to get you back. I tell my family says they have guns and they'll just kill you. I go to the director of Wildflower Alliance and said, I don't know if I should go. And she said, hope and possibility. She said, what would you need to be able to go? I said, I need backup. I need a crew. I need my own hotel room. And I went, and it was messy by the end. My tolerance for being in the here and now was not that big. I'm on the airplane. I got my hoodie over my face, and I'm bawling my eyeballs out. And she says to me, she doesn't say, are you decompensating? Should I call your family? Should we have an ambulance waiting for you when we get to Bradley? She didn't say that. She said we are pushing the envelope and we're going to keep pushing it and make it bigger and bigger. She had a vision for me before I did. One time I asked her, like, why do you even talk to me? She said, I have a long-term investment in you. And I said, oh, I need to get one of those. And so this guy's Paul Baker. He's the guy who started the first Hearing Voices group in 1988 in the UK. When I met him, I wasn't even talking, and he still let me go to a training because he had a belief that there was somebody in there. And so he had faith. I don't know if he had faith in me or faith in the process, but this perspective that people can heal and change. And I saw him 5 years later. He puts his arm around me. He goes, "Hey, Marty, I liked you better when you didn't talk." And I thought that was funny. This was me going back to the ER of a hospital I would land in a whole lot, and DMH had me go. I used to be a DMH client. And the area director said, "Don't be negative." I said, "Well, what can I say?" And she said, "Whatever was helpful." And so I thanked everybody who broke the rules. Thank you to the person who hugged me when I needed to be hugged. Thank you to the person who let me walk on the unit, like walk onto it versus go on the stretcher. Thank you to the people who let me have my headphones. Thank you to people who talked to me like I was a person, not a patient. And that male officer, he said, if I connect with somebody, I know my day goes better. Instead of staring and powering over, that guy, the tall one is the one who kept telling me I wasn't crazy. That whatever I was going through made sense in the context of my life. And I really believed, I could do the work, I could process the pain, and yeah, he helped me more than any therapist. Although we learned a lot from therapists. Like we would get coaching. He would get coaching on how to do things with me. This is my eldest daughter. When she was 12, I quit hugging her. I wouldn't let her touch me. It made me feel sick. Um, the tall guy said to me, well, what was happening to you when you were 12? I went, oh. He goes, well, you're an appropriate adult. You're a man says to hug your daughter every time you see her. And I explained to her, I always loved her. I just wasn't always capable of showing it. That was about me, not her, because she thought I quit loving her. That's Marius Rome, the guy who a psychiatrist who wrote all those books and has done research for years. I got to go to the Netherlands and get an award from him. So I've gone from the person who was going into the long-term mixed forensic unit, but my oldest daughter saved me from it, to this person who gets to do all sorts of things. Those are my other granddaughters. The taller one walks in, she's 12. My stomach does that thing, but now I can recognize it. And I can say, my trauma can inform me, but it doesn't have to define me. So just highlight, we've been recognized by the World Health Organization for having a rights-based approach. We also, at Wildflower, we have a peer respite. We now have the first LGBTQ peer respite, we think, in the world that we know of. So that's a place to go that is not, doesn't totally isolate somebody from their community. So for instance, I told you, when I went there, they said, what if anything is helpful about the hospital? Can we recreate it without you having to go? And I said, well, I hate my answer, but there is something helpful when they lock me in a room for 3 days or 4 days. And they said, well, we have rooms and they lock, but from the inside. And so, like, they taught me something that worked, but what happens if I decide to stay in my room? That's a symptom. I'm isolating. I'm like, shoot, you taught me this helps me, but if I do it, oh my gosh. So this is the point, how do we approach people, not, taking their inventory of everything wrong with them and instead build on their strengths and talk about what do they need to make things possible. Um, Here's a question. What color is that dress? Quick, put it in the chat. What do you see? All right, Carrie, read some out for me. If there's some in there, please.
Sorry. Okay. It's like half and half, gold and white, half blue and black. It's basically, somebody said tan and white, blue and
We
black,
can take a
black and blue,
vote.
blue and gold. I see
Yep.
white, gold, white and
Seems like
gold.
green and red. It's just like you might be colorblind now.
Right.
Carrie, what do you see?
I see white and gold, but the white is kind of bluish.
Is it really good?
And so if I told you I see blue and black, and I tell you you're wrong,
Mm-hmm.
are you gonna want to enter into a conversation with me?
Me personally, yes, I would. Because I'm
Why, to prove
argumentative.
me wrong?
Yes.
Yes, to argue. All right. You're trying to connect with somebody, and if they don't feel listened to, they probably aren't going to listen to you. That's
Somebody
kind
put
of
it
the
in the
point of
chat.
this.
This has been on my mind for 10 years straight.
And so, one of the times I did this with a variation of this group, somebody said, well, what's the right answer? And I said, well, what do you see? And they told me. And I said, I believe you. I believe that's what you see. And it was so hard for them to do that. And we don't have to see the same thing for me to believe that you're having this experience or this perception. That is the point. But if I'm meeting with somebody and they tell me it's not real, just ignore it. I'm like, oh, you're calling me a liar. B, when people tell me to ignore my voices, you know what I wanted to do? I wanted to yell at them and see how good they were at ignoring it. When you're saying ignore it, you're putting somebody in the victim role. Imagine that. Like if you're sitting there and someone's screaming and screaming at you or calling you names or degrading you, and and people just say, well, ignore it. Can you imagine how you fall into a victim role? If the only thing I can do is take a pill or ignore it, I'm stuck. So anything I try, even if it doesn't work, gets me out of the victim role. I'm now in the game. I'm trying to do something. I mentioned metaphors. Uh, you meet somebody, you're getting the tip of the iceberg. You're getting teensy part of the story. Maybe not even an accurate story. I'm always interested in not just today, but how did we get today? How did we get here, right? Um, and so that curiosity. How long have you been feeling that way? When did this first start happening in your life? How do you make sense of it? What would a life worth living look like? What would support look like? The things that voice says, or the thing that you see, the feeling it creates in you, have you had that feeling other times in your life? There are places that you go where you don't feel it or you don't hear it. And I also just want to say I get so sad when people say, we've tried everything. I'm like, no, you haven't. There are clinical options. Neurofeedback is a great one because you don't even have to talk about your trauma, but you are learning to, calm your brain. Or, some people do it to learn how to focus, but it's a very empowering approach. Somatic therapy, getting the trauma out of your body, internal family systems. I love Frank Anderson because he was trained in trauma with Bessel von der Kolk, and then he went over to internal family systems. And somebody comes in and says, I want to kill myself. He goes, great, you want to change your life. Let's talk about it. What needs to change in your life? Um, so anyways, anything that helps somebody have meaning, purpose, or a connection could be healing. People said earlier in the chat, developing trust. And so in case you guys didn't figure it out, that first thing that we read, the 50-year-old woman, that was me. And I just shared like how things shifted for me. How do we do this? This is the meat here. Trying to build connection. Uh, Dr. Liz Simpson, I'm not sure if she's still at Mass Mental, but she would say, quit doing the assessment and start connecting. You'll get more information and it'll be more honest. And if you didn't get any of those questions answered, you can circle back after you have built connection. Like people who are worried about liability, she's like, you get way more by connecting with somebody, way more accurate, useful information than you do by just doing a checklist. So there's validation, curiosity, vulnerability, community. If we have all those pieces, we get connection, validation. I see you, I accept you, I'm here to partner you. You do not have to have the same perception or feeling as somebody else to validate it. For instance, you may never have a voice yelling at you, but you've probably been yelled at. And you can say, hey, I don't like it when I'm getting yelled at. That would be validated. Or somebody's talking about something and it's not your perception. You may not even know what they're talking about, but they're clearly afraid. You can say that sounds really scary. Things that help you when you have this fear. I also I love going towards the fear to try to figure out where it comes from. It may not match this moment, but the fear the person has came from somewhere. So I'm always curious about going back and that. Curiosity, my experience on mental health units, you get a drive-by, a walk-by, actually. A scale of 1 to 10, how do you feel today, Cindy? And I was usually in my Marty mindset at the time, so I would raise one finger. Like, don't even talk to me because you don't even care. You're just, circling a box. And usually it was about symptoms, not about my life. For instance, living in Holyoke, I'd seen somebody shot to death, died on our front steps in broad daylight on Father's Day. And when people would ask me if I felt safe, they weren't talking about where I lived. They talked like I was the bomb. Nobody was looking at the context of where my fear might be coming from. Um, Vulnerability, that's where you get to be you and say, hey, I have an hour to be with you today. This is what I'm supposed to accomplish, but I'm interested in what you'd like to accomplish or what you want to talk about. Somebody might say, get me out of here. I've had to have this conversation so many times. I'm like, I don't have the power to get you out of here, but I can give you information. and you can make decisions, and we can try to figure out a plan to help get you out of here. You know, like, I get to own my own limits. I can say to somebody, I don't understand what you're saying, but I'm trying really hard. Can you slow down for me? Um, yeah. So you get to be a human being in this community. Guess what? We're not alone. There are other people, places, things. Sometimes somebody has nobody, but maybe they have music. Maybe they have a TV show. Uh, Holyoke Medical Center, I swear, every day, Law and Order SUV was on. People were trying to figure out their trauma and how to move through it by watching that show for hours and hours. And sometimes they felt better when somebody got justice. Um, so that was a very connecting thing. That sounds hard, makes sense you're angry. I can see why you feel that way. I'm sorry that happened to you. Thank you. When in doubt, I can always just say thank you for sharing that, even if I'm not sure what they're saying. Uh, it must be really difficult to live in those circumstances. Um, Curiosity versus fear. Was there something that was happening when this started? When did this fear first come into your life? Have you heard this message before? And so these questions both go towards the difficult and go towards possibility. Was there a time in your life where things were good? Is there a place that you go that you feel accepted? Uh, a friend of mine would say to me, how do you put on your armor? Which resonated for me. Yeah, what would you like your life to look like? And sometimes you get really odd answers, but it gives you a sense of what they're looking for. Like, I had somebody say, I want a generator and I want to go live in the woods. Uh, have you gone through this before and what helped? How did things shift last time? Being honest about your own limits. Uh, Sometimes I say to people, I don't know what to say, but I'm glad I'm here with you. Or I might say, I don't know what to say, and I'm not sure what would be helpful. You know what people say most often? You're doing it, you're listening. And maybe the first time they were ever listened to. Just having a place to say this stuff out loud can help somebody organize their experience. They can find their own contradictions in their thoughts once they say them out loud. Or, they can come to realizations. Like, so much stuff would make more sense in my head until I said it out loud. And I'm like, oh, shoot. But I needed somebody to do that with. And lots of ideas about community. And again, having a really broad sense of community. I can remember I was inpatient, met somebody there. They got out before me. They went to Wildflower. I got out. And they said, I got tickets for us for Dropkick Murphys. I don't know if you guys know who that is. Boston Irish punk band. And for Friday, I tell my therapist, she's like, don't go. You can't handle that. I'm like, that is something to live for. And to jump up and down with 5,000 people I don't know and we're singing the same lyrics, that felt like community to me. So those things were really important.